In the sweltering heat of summer, Fendai was dragged into the courtyard, stripped of her outer garments, and pinned down to receive a beating. The newlywed mistress stood under the veranda, watching with mild disapproval. She chided the master. "She was left to you by the old madam. Surely, she deserves a bit of dignity." The old madam, indulging her grandson, promoted Fendai to a personal maid. When the master returned and found the dish gone, he flew into a rage. It turned out that the rice balls had been handmade by the mistress, who had scalded her fingers in boiling water while preparing them. I watched, my eyes stinging and my temples throbbing with pain. The old madam had once joked that, among all the maids in the house, I had the most voracious appetite, as if I were a reincarnated starved ghost, a fitting legacy for someone born to a cook. After the punishment, Fendai was thrown back into the room. The master was a noble by birth, uninterested in studies or civil service. He had bought himself a fifth-rank post as a bureaucratic officer just to have something to do. At dusk, I carried a square box to find Mother Tian. I no longer enjoyed the prestige of serving in the master's quarters. Now even the lowest-ranking maids felt entitled to order me around. Her gaze lingered on the fish for a moment before shifting to me. My heart sank. "Sure enough," she said, "Hong Yu, take these fish and cut them into narrow slices. Marinate them in some old red lees." Then, turning back to the man, she added, "Next time you and Xingwang come to drink with me, I'll steam a dish of it, drizzle it with sesame oil. It'll be heavenly. Your kindness won't go to waste, Brother Yin." Lowering my gaze, I took the fish and left, pocketing the 2 walnuts she handed me as a reward. As I circled around to the back gate, the man from earlier caught up with me, blocking my way. "What now?" I frowned at him. He smiled and said, "Sister Hong Yu, busy as ever. Don't you remember me? Back when I studied with the master in the schoolhouse, I once offered him some pastries. You praised the buttery snail puffs I brought and asked where I'd bought them." Recognition dawned. It was Zhen Yun, the master's cousin. His father had died young, leaving him and his widowed mother to scrape by with a small plot of land. For a time, the master was close to him, but that changed quickly. Zhen Yun was a better student than the master, which naturally displeased him. After Zhen Yun's mother passed away half a year later, leaving no one to support him, he returned to his old home in Jinling. Back then, he had been shorter, dressed in mourning, with boyish features yet to mature. He was nothing like the man standing before me now. Zhen Yun said, "I've never forgotten your kindness, Sister Hong Yu. I've always wanted to repay you. I regret that my visit today only added to your workload. It's entirely my fault. But why are you in the kitchen now? Even tending flowers and trees would be better than this." I replied, "I enjoy working in the kitchen. Let's not talk about kindness. Such words are too grand for someone like me. I'm just a lowly maid, unworthy of such sentiment." Zhen Yun said, "I'm staying on the back street now. If you ever face trouble, come find me. I'll do whatever it takes to help, even if it costs me my life." His words startled me. If anyone overheard, they would surely stir up gossip and trouble. I quickly walked past him without another word. Behind me, he seemed to say something more, but I didn't catch it. Fendai had gained a considerable amount of weight. Her once sharp chin and bright almond-shaped eyes had made her small face strikingly delicate. Now her figure had rounded out. She was still pleasant to look at, but far from the beauty she used to be. I examined her carefully. She wore a dress made during Aunt Ti's time, and the tight fit at the waist betrayed how much weight she had gained. Her rings pressed painfully against her fingers, and her bangles barely had any room to move. Everyone said that Qian Yinyang was playing the role of a mistress, but how could she be a proper mistress when she didn't even get new clothes? I whispered my observation to her, and she clasped my hand, lowering her gaze. "The eldest mistress sends food every day," she said softly. "The master came by once, sat briefly, and left without staying the night. It's better this way. I don't have to drink that bitter concoction anymore." According to the rules, since the eldest mistress was childless, none of the concubines or bed servants were exempt from taking contraceptives. Fendai used to eagerly await the eldest mistress's arrival in the household, hoping for a reprieve. As we spoke, a maid from the eldest mistress's quarters entered, carrying a food box. With a forced smile, she said, "Aunt, what fortune you have. The eldest mistress has sent more food for you today." Fendai's face lit up instantly with a smile. "Thank the eldest mistress for me," she replied. But I knew her too well. We had been close for years, and I could easily see the strain behind her expression. The maid opened the box, laying the food out on the table. It was an impressive spread: roast duck, smoked pork, a pair of pig trotters, 3 large buns, and a deep bowl of 8 treasure soup. But the portions were excessive, more fit for a feast than a meal. The maid stood nearby, her eyes fixed on Fendai, ensuring she ate every bite. Fendai's cheeks bulged as she forced down the food, her swallowing labored. Several times, she looked like she might gag, but the maid coldly reminded her, "This is the mistress's goodwill. Don't waste it." Fendai nodded weakly, struggling to comply. It wasn't a meal, it was a punishment. I couldn't bear to watch. When the maid finally left with the empty food box, Fendai collapsed, exhausted. "This charade happens every day," she confessed, no longer hiding the truth. "When I still had money, I could bribe the servants to turn a blind eye, but even then, my figure was ruined. Now that the money's gone, this endless force-feeding will be the death of me. The master? He's no help." She paused, staring blankly. If I'd known it would come to this, I'd never have agreed to serve in the master's quarters. I was a fine person, and now I'll be buried here. Her words made my heart ache for her. The eldest mistress had been in the household long enough for everyone to understand her nature. Her gentle and kind demeanor was merely a facade. Anyone who displeased her faced consequences sooner or later. Raising Fendai to the status of a concubine had been nothing more than a calculated gesture to show her magnanimity. With Fendai serving as a symbol, the elders were appeased. Before I left, Fendai opened her jewelry box and handed me her last remaining silver hairpin, shaped like a pomegranate blossom. "Hong Yu," she said, "take this. If I die one day, burn some paper offerings for me at my grave. I hope in my next life, I can be born into a good family and become a proper wife." I refused the hairpin. I couldn't let Fendai lose her life so silently. I was a servant born into this household. When I was 10, the old madam hosted a banquet, and my mother prepared 8 treasure tofu for the occasion. The dish was popular among the masters, with tender tofu slices cooked in chicken stock and garnished with minced mushrooms, pine nuts, melon seeds, shredded chicken, and ham. But one of the female guests mentioned a dish from the wedding banquet of Minister Su's daughter, abalone tofu. That dish featured abalone slices simmered with tofu in chicken broth, topped with aged wine lees. Its refined flavor far outshone the simpler 8 treasure tofu. The old madam felt slighted and left in a sour mood. The old master, ever the dutiful son, was furious at my mother's failure. He docked her pay and had her flogged with 20 strokes. She was already unwell at the time and didn't survive. With my mother gone, I had no one to protect me. I was transferred from the needlework room to sweeping the old madam's courtyard. Fendai had been bought into the household as an offering to the old madam. With her beauty and excellent needlework, she quickly won favor. I was young, clumsy, and often bullied, but Fendai always stood up for me. She argued with other maids on my behalf and shared whatever she had with me. When the old madam gifted her to the master, she didn't forget me. It was Fendai who presented my snowflake cakes to the master, flattering him into promoting me to a second class, made to serve tea in his quarters. We had spent years together, day and night. How could I abandon her now? Nanny Tian had made me cook countless times, and I knew one thing about her. She loved fish. At dawn, I left the estate and went to the market to select the freshest grass carp. Back in the kitchen, I split the fish in half, removed the bones, and pinned the fillet to a board, scraping the flesh downward to make a smooth paste. I placed the fish paste in a bowl, stirring it repeatedly. Once the water boiled, I added scallions, ginger, and rock salt. Using a spoon, I carefully dropped dollops of the fish paste into the pot. As they solidified, they became delicate, translucent shui jingyu yuan, crystal fish balls. I had only made this dish once before for Fendai's birthday last year. My mother used to say that complex dishes like this should only be prepared when specifically requested by the masters. If they liked it, they'd keep ordering it, and 2 hands alone wouldn't be enough to meet the demand. I placed the fish balls in the top layer of a food box. Beneath them, I arranged the silver and jewelry I had saved over the years. These were for Nanny Tian. I hoped to bribe her into persuading the maids delivering food to Fendai to show some leniency. This wasn't a long-term solution, but there wasn't another option. Fendai was already crushed under the eldest mistress's torment and the master's indifference. I feared she might lose the will to live. As I walked along the veranda, turned past the garden and reached the back gate, I unexpectedly ran into Zhen Yun. He stood in the shade of a tree, dappled sunlight falling on his face through the branches. He was smiling, but his eyes held doubt. "I saw you buying fish at the morning market," he said. "I guessed you were heading to see Nanny Tian. Are you asking for her help, or is she forcing you to do something again?" I instinctively shifted the food box behind me. "Why aren't you studying?" I retorted. "Why meddle in my business?" Just a few days ago, I had heard Jin Yun had passed the imperial exam at the Shiotsi level. The family's fortunes had improved significantly. Sure enough, he now wore a blue robe and a square cap, far removed from the ragged state I remembered. Zhen Yun stepped closer. "I came looking for you. I told you before, if you ever need help, find me on the back street. Nanny Tian is greedy and ruthless, with blood on her hands. You should stay far away from her." His tone was earnest. "Your troubles are written all over your face. I remember when my mother was ill and needed ginseng for her medicine. I begged your elder brother, but he claimed he had none. It was you who secretly gave me a few strands of ginseng root. I owe you, and I won't stand by while you're in need." Back then, my mother had died tragically, and seeing Zhen Yun denied help stirred my sympathy. I gave him the leftover ginseng from the master's soup. The old madam had sent the ginseng to the master to support his studies, ordering that he drink ginseng chicken soup every 2 days. The master grew tired of it quickly, and even the lowliest maids in the household had tasted it. Could Zhen Yun truly be trusted? I studied his eyes as he nodded solemnly. "Fine." Leading him behind the rock garden, I revealed everything about Fendai. In the dim light, Zhen Yun's brows furrowed at first, but gradually smoothed out. "So," he said, "your food box also contains silver and jewelry?" I opened the lower layer of the box. Zhen Yun glanced briefly inside before looking away. "My sister-in-law may torment Qianinyang," he said, "but she won't take her life, at least not for now. In the outside world, my elder brother relies on his father-in-law's influence. If word spread that he didn't even keep a concubine, people would laugh at him." He added, "And you know your elder brother's temperament. He's indulgent and indiscriminate in his pleasures." He stopped abruptly, an awkward expression crossing his face. After a moment, he continued, "Don't worry. Leave Qian Yinyang's situation to me. As for Nanny Tian, don't go to her anymore." This was a gamble, but it was all I had. I shoved the food box into Zhen Yun's hands. "Use the money inside as you see fit. The fish balls are in there too. Eat them if you don't mind. I'll leave it to you." I had been away for too long and needed to return. I glanced at Zhen Yun one last time. Fendai's life, and mine, were now in his hands. Heaven help me. Let this bet pay off, and let Zhen Yun be someone I can trust. As I stepped out of the rock garden, a drop of water landed on my face. Large raindrops began to fall, and when I looked up, the sky was a brooding gray, promising a heavy downpour. The morning market bustled with activity, its heat rolling in waves that clung to every face. I sold 2 jars of lotus wine, which I had brewed over the summer, and hurried back to the estate. It had been 2 months since Junyan took my silver and disappeared without a word. Meanwhile, the eldest mistress had grown more relentless, not only continuing her daily food deliveries, but also escalating her torment. Even plain rice wasn't spared. She had the servants mix it with lard. Fendai had gained more weight. I had already hidden the mirror in her room, but she would still gaze at her reflection in the water, over and over. Stroking her face, she once asked me, "Hongyu, do you think I still look human?" Forcing a smile, I replied, "Don't say that. You've always had a good foundation. You'll always be beautiful." I was lying. The current Fendai had a round, bloated face with sallow skin. Her once lovely, vibrant dresses now only accentuated her haggard and swollen appearance. All I could do was make some food in secret, sell it, and scrape together a bit of silver to make her life a little more bearable. The eldest mistress clearly wanted Fendai to suffer. Any allowance she gave was purely for appearances. If it weren't for the trouble with Nanny Tian's son, who had beaten a man to death and found himself entangled with a family unwilling to let the matter drop, she might have escalated her cruelty even further. There wouldn't have been any room left for me to keep watch over Fendai. That day, the eldest mistress sent word, instructing me to prepare a dragon and pearl soup for the master. The dish wasn't difficult, for meatballs nestled with a flower-shaped roll of pork intestine in a bowl. I had just finished cooking when Mama Lu, returning from errands, sidled and giggling and gossiping with the other maids. A green cloth sedan chair came through the corner gate, carrying a new concubine for our master. They say she's been kept outside until now, and the eldest mistress herself invited her in. My heart sank, but I continued my work without pause. Once everything was in order, I slipped away to find Fendai. From a distance, I saw her courtyard bustling with people. There was no way I could enter. It wasn't until nightfall that I managed to enter her room. The moment I lifted the curtain, an overpowering fragrance greeted me. Everywhere I looked, the room glittered and gleamed, leaving no place to step. Fendai stood in front of a Western-style mirror. When she turned and saw me, she laughed and cried at the same time. From now on, I won't have to endure such suffering anymore. The eldest mistress promised that as long as I win the master's favor, I won't have to drink that avoidance soup again. I was stunned. The master had no children yet. Could the eldest mistress truly feel so secure letting Fendai go unchecked? Fendai pulled me to sit, taking off an earring and pressing it into my hand. "Hongyu, if it weren't for you, I'd have died long ago. I wouldn't have lived to see today." The golden earring, inlaid with gems, pricked against my palm. Meeting her gaze, I asked, "Do you know why the eldest mistress is treating you like this?" She released my hand, turning her face away. "Don't you know? It must have spread across the courtyard by now. The master's outside woman has been brought into the estate. The eldest mistress is raising my status, so I can compete with her." Her candor left me speechless. After a long silence, Fendai turned back, her smile bitter. "But Hongyu, I'd rather be the eldest mistress's pawn. At least this way, I have a chance to see the master. I don't have to keep swallowing those greasy, sickening meals. Let the future take care of itself." I opened my mouth to offer comfort, but the words felt hollow even to me. We are mere servants, and the eldest mistress is our master. No matter how carefully we tread, our lives are dictated by her whims. Rebellion is useless, and resistance is futile. Fendai walked to the window and slowly pushed it open. Moonlight flooded the room, and she stood there, her scarf fluttering in the night breeze. Without turning, she said, "Hongyu, come look at the moon with me. It's beautiful tonight." I walked over and stood beside her. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her face glistening with tears under the pale light. The new concubine, known as Mei Inyang, was a beauty, and everyone in the estate referred to her by that name. Mei Yang had a delicate oval face, with eyebrows like distant mountains and eyes as clear as the jade waters beneath them. It was no wonder that the master praised her as a lotus in full bloom and willow-like in grace. She was generous with her rewards. After I prepared a crab dish for her, she gave me 4 taels of silver. 4 taels of silver could buy over 100 jin of rice, enough to feed a family for a long time. Rumors spread through the estate. Some said that Mei Yang was a former courtesan, sullied by her past with the master. Others claimed she was from a good family, once promised to someone else, but the master had used underhanded methods to take her for himself, even stirring up a legal dispute in the process. But who could say for sure? It hardly mattered to me. It wasn't until Jinyun appeared before me again that everything took a different turn. He smiled and said, "The task is done. Finally, I can face you with some honor. My elder brother has high standards, so I've been searching for the right person for a long time. I had to deliver her to him without leaving a trace, then go to my sister-in-law to smooth things over. Now it's finally settled." I had suspected something for a while, but never dared to think too much of it. The master had never been close with his cousin, Jinyun, and Jinyun, a scholar by nature, had never involved himself in the inner workings of a household. To think he would stoop so low to participate in this. I quickly did the math in my head. Considering Mei Yingyang's beauty and her character, I doubt the money I gave you was enough. How much did you spend on this arrangement? I knew well that Mei Yingyang's entry into the household and the eldest mistress's rise in power couldn't be settled with just a few taels of silver. Had Jinyun really been running around all this time just to repay a debt to me? After a long pause, I finally asked, "Do you have feelings for me?" There was a flicker of surprise in Jinyun's eyes, as though he hadn't expected me to be so direct. But he quickly responded with openness, "Yes." For a moment, my heart churned, but all that came out of my mouth was a bitter taste. "Jinyun, I don't want to get married. I just want to leave the estate and open a small food stall. I want to live freely, without looking at anyone's face, and without worrying about being punished by my masters." Jinyun's face darkened for a moment, but he quickly asked, "Sister, when I said yes, didn't you feel the slightest happiness in your heart?" I didn't answer. That night, I dreamed of my mother. She was holding a bowl of milk and beckoning me from the corner where the jujube paste was being ground. "Drink it while it's warm. I've added sugar, it's sweet." I rushed over to her, drank it all in one go, and heard her say, "The wind's picking up, don't run around outside. Let's go inside and eat the pine flower cakes." When I woke up, my face was wet. The breathing of my roommates filled the dark room, long and steady. I closed my eyes but couldn't sleep again. The days passed quickly, as usual, and I spent my time in the kitchen, tending to the stove. I saw less and less of Fendai. The master would visit her room every few days, and I didn't dare intrude. Having shed her torment, Fendai had been nurtured back to health and transformed into a beautiful, curvaceous woman with an air of seductive charm. The master reveled in his pleasures, enjoying both her and Mei Yingyang. At this point, news spread that the eldest mistress was pregnant. I thought she would seize the opportunity to rise, but unexpectedly, she handed over the management of the household to Mei Yingyang and settled into care for her pregnancy. Fendai's life, meanwhile, grew even easier. Mei Yingyang and Fendai were both concubines. Anything good to eat or use was shared between them, with Mei Yingyang ensuring Fendai wasn't left out. I wished Fendai could have a child of her own, just like the eldest mistress. With children, even if one fell out of favor, life in the deep chambers of the estate could still improve. One rainy day, the master's servant called for me. I was familiar with the servant, having worked in the master's room before. He used to bring things for us maids when we needed them. When he saw me, he immediately said, "Congratulate Hongyu, a great fortune is coming your way." He didn't elaborate, though. I pretended not to understand, refusing to give him any silver. The servant's face soured, and he muttered under his breath as he led me over, forgetting how we used to work together when we were all in the master's room. Any small mistake he made was always smoothed over by the head maid. The master sat with Mei Yinyang, and there was nothing unusual about it. But when Jinyun stood up from his seat next to the master and bowed to him with solemnity, he said, "It's her. Brother Yun thanks brother for his help." The master only smiled. "Hongyu's pastries are the best. You're lucky." At that moment, I realized what was happening. The master had given me to Jinyun. Jinyun's private courtyard was small but tidy. In the center of it stood an osmanthus tree, its fragrance easily detectable from afar. I followed him into the room. As we walked, Jinyun explained himself. He wasn't trying to force me into anything but, rather, using the master's influence to help me escape the estate. He pulled out the deed to my freedom and handed it to me. When I didn't take it, Jinyun lit a match and set the deed on fire. The paper curled into ashes, falling gently to the ground. He said, "Hongyu, from this moment on you're free. I have another place to stay, so feel free to live here for now. Just lock the door at night, and I'll come to see you when I can." After that, he went into the inner room and returned with a bundle in hand. "It's getting late. You should rest." Just before he left, I called out to him, "Jinyun, I can't repay you." I knew this was true. Without turning around, he spoke in a low voice. "Last time, you made your feelings very clear. I understand your concerns. Hongyu, you're a good person. To be able to do something good for someone like you is enough for me." And with that, he left. I stood still, silently questioning my heart. It was certainly wonderful to be rid of the status of a servant. I was grateful to him, but it wasn't the kind of gratitude that comes from romantic love. Though I had gained my freedom, a part of me still worried about Fendai. True to his word, Jinyun hardly visited. During his absence, I began to think about my future. When he returned, I planned to discuss renting the house from him. I would pay him back as soon as I made enough money. Jinyun agreed. The house was equipped with a stove, and I decided to set up a small stall at the morning market, selling pastries. I started with xiaobing, a simple and quick dish. I crushed pine nuts and walnuts, mixed them with rock sugar and lard, and kneaded the dough. When it was golden on both sides, I added sesame seeds. Xiaobing was cheap, and the profit was slim, but there were enough customers to help me save money. In less than half a month, I had saved enough to pay Jinyun's rent. After leaving the estate, I learned that Jinyun didn't rely entirely on his position there. In Spring Branch Alley, he had opened a calligraphy and painting shop. I went there one day and found Jinyun attending to customers. I stopped at the door and watched him from a distance. Jinyun's elegant appearance made him seem humble when greeting customers, but there was no trace of obsequiousness. When he finished with the customers, he came over and greeted me. "You've managed to earn enough in such a short time. Business must be good." His words made me feel somewhat shy. "It's thanks to you. I picked osmanthus flowers from the yard and made osmanthus sugar, so I have another source of income. I brought some for you to try." He took the money pouch and osmanthus sugar and glanced at them. "If you're still making osmanthus sugar next year, you can get the wrapping paper for me. You make money, and it helps my business too." I quickly explained, "I don't use much wrapping paper, so I didn't want to bother you, but I'll definitely get it from you next time." Jinyun smiled. "I was just joking with you. Actually, I wanted to ask if, on the 1st and 15th days of each month, some of my friends gather at my shop for casual conversation. If you'd like, you could send some tea snacks over. I'll pay you monthly for it. How does that sound?" I shook my head. "I'd be happy to send tea snacks like apricot preserves, green cakes, or sesame dumplings. Whatever you want, I can make. But I can't accept money for it." I sighed without realizing it. "About Mei Yinyang, I still owe you some silver." His expression darkened. For the first time, Jinyun showed displeasure in front of me. Must everything be so clearly divided? I lowered my lashes, feeling a pang of guilt. His voice came again. "My father passed away early, and my mother and I lived off the estate. My elder brother is the darling of the old lady, and only by currying favor with him could life be tolerable. When I brought tea snacks, My elder brother rejected them, and it was you who saved me. You ate and laughed, your eyes crescent-shaped, and it warmed my heart. I finally looked into his eyes. He smiled bitterly. Later, when I sought medicine, you helped me again. Honestly, you didn't have to do anything for me. That's when I decided that in this life, I would repay you. I can't explain when it happened, but you've been in my thoughts constantly. When I studied, when I traveled by carriage, you were always there in my mind. That's why I decided to return. The road to fame is long, but you couldn't wait in the estate. A profound silence enveloped the space. Though Zhang Yun stood right before me, I couldn't make sense of what he was saying. Eventually, I could hear it, the frantic pounding of my own heart, a deafening sound in my chest. Noon's sunlight was blinding as a woman stood on a high platform, squinting her eyes. A grass marker was stuck in her disheveled hair. The Jun family had fallen. The eldest mistress's family had angered the new emperor, and as relatives, the Jun family was implicated. They were accused of wrongdoing, and the elder brother was charged with secretly marrying a concubine during the national mourning period. The eldest mistress took over the lawsuit and engaged in usury. The rightful masters were either exiled or imprisoned, and others were sold into slavery. Among them was Fendai. She closed her eyes, not seeing Zhang Yun handing silver to a slave trader, with Hong Yu carefully holding a food box containing hot chicken soup dumplings. One bite, and they were so comforting. The crowd below, full of onlookers, shouted, but Fendai's mind wandered back to the past, those grievances and resentments that had been deeply engraved in her bones. The passing of joy and sorrow, the warmth and coldness of human relationships, all happened in such a short span of 2 years. She finally opened her eyes. The sun was just right, and an old friend had returned.